Classes are the foundation of object-oriented programming, if you've heard of that before, and it kind of allows you to actually like do stuff with code. Like if you want to become like a software developer in the future, like this is what they use. They use classes, and they use it to interact with objects, do other stuff with it. So this class, um, so classes, right, is a pretty complicated topic. So this might be one of like the more harder classes to follow. So if you're just like stuck on anything, make sure to ask questions because this will probably be one of the more harder topics. And so yeah, we have an example here. So an example of a class is a cat. So a class can really be anything. Like it doesn't have to be a cat. It just has to be basically something, right? And the cat has many different properties like four legs, mustache, tail fluffy. It also has methods, which we will talk about later. So it has lie, mew, jump, scratch. Really class. The name can really be anything, right? So cat is just an example. It could also be like person, student, or whatever. But usually, like when you wanna use like an example, it's helpful to use like an actual like living organism that actually has properties and actually can do stuff. So what's an object? Because I was talking about it in the first slide, and maybe you haven't. Because normally in everyday life, when we use the word object, we're just referring to like something that we can like usually touch or anything. And in code, it's has a pretty different meaning. An object is known as an instance of a class, which can have many different attributes. So what's an instance of a class? Well, basically, when you define a class, you're defining something that you can use, right? Just like how you define a function. If you're gonna define a function, right? The function's that just there. It's not gonna do anything unless you directly reference it, right? So a class is basically the same thing. If you define a class, it's just gonna be there. It's not gonna do anything. If you run the code, so let's just say I created a class called person, and I didn't put anything in here. I just put pass. Pass basically means here I'll give you an example. Um, Hold on. So let's say when you if you define a function and you don't put anything in there, usually what should happen when you run the program is you're getting an error. However, what the pass keyword does is it um, basically says I defined something, but I don't want to do anything with it yet. So it basically means you can define something, but when you run the program, you're not going to get an error. It just basically just does nothing. So that's why the pass keyword is sometimes useful. Um, So yeah, if you want to define a class, the first thing is obviously to define a class, you want to use the keyword class. So basically class and then followed by what you want to name your class. And I can just show, okay, I'll just show something real quick. So let's say you have class, right? Um, we have a class called book. So if I run the program right now, literally nothing happens. So that's kind of what I mean when I say when you have a class, you define the class, it's just kind of there. It doesn't really do anything. You don't have an object yet. You haven't directly referenced the class yet. It's just sitting there, basically waiting to be used. Um, and just a note, it's common when you want to define a class, right? You put class and then the name. It's common convention to capitalize the first letter of your class. So let's say you want your class name to be person. Usually, what most programmers do is they capitalize the first letter of the class name. So, for example, notice how if I create a class called book, um, I capitalize book like the first letter instead of just doing this because this looks a bit odd in my opinion. So usually what people do is just do this, right? You can even you can even create a class called class, but if you try to create a class called class but you don't capitalize it, you get an error. However, if you actually capitalize it, right? Well, then you can create stuff. And usually, why people actually do this is because you can, if you, when you create a class name, you have to be really careful about what you name it. Because in Python, we learned about some keywords, right? Like we learned about range, right? For I, like in previous classes, we learned about what the range, what this range thing does, right? So if you need a quick refresher, what it basically does is it's gonna print all the numbers from 1 to 6, but not including 6. So it'll just do 1 to 5. And basically, what word here, it's it's reserved. Like this word is reserved for something. Python will detect this word and say, okay, this is what I do. So it's important you don't use it for something else. For example, you do not want to create a variable named range because range defines something else. It's a reserved keyword. You have to use it for this purpose only, right? So in the same way, if you want to create a class, you can't name your class because class already means something else. However, if you put an uppercase, well, that's different. Uppercase class is different from lowercase class, and this is perfectly fine. So that's just something you should know when creating classes because if you ever take a look at like a software programmer's code, right? If you're gonna see a bunch of classes and it's gonna be, uppercase, then some other stuff, uppercase, some other stuff. It's never gonna, it's probably never just gonna be a lowercase first letter. So what's exactly placed inside a class? So a class is useless if it doesn't actually have stuff in it, right? Like what we created before. Um, let me just so let me just create the same thing. So let's say dog, right? Put nothing in it, so it's useless right now. However, you can put some stuff in here, right? So let me explain what each thing does. So I'll just species. This is Canis lupus, and then F in it, and then self dot name equals name. Do self dot breed equals breed. Okay, so let me explain what this class actually does. So I defined a class, right, and I called it dog, and I just created a variable inside the class, and this class is called species. Now, what species does is basically so that whenever you try to access this dog class, right, the species is always going to be Canis lupus. It's going to be this species. That's what it's going to be here. That's why I said class. It's called a class attribute, and that basically means whenever you have an instance of a class, basically whenever you reference a class, the species is always going to be the same unless you change it yourself. However, an instance attribute is something that you can choose, right? So you can choose what the name you want to be. You can choose what breed you want the dog to be, right? So you could, if you have a dog, right, and you want to reference the class, you could say you want your dog's name to be, I don't know, John, and you want the breed to be a golden retriever. Well, that's fine. You decided what you wanted the name to be. You decided what the breed is going to be, but you didn't decide what the species is because the species is automatic. What you created here, this is going to be automatic. You don't have to define it because the species of dog is Canis lupus. That's a name for the species of dog, and that's going to be the same for any dog you have. So it makes sense that you don't want to change this. Just like how a car is a vehicle. Like all cars are vehicles. You don't want to have to say this car is a vehicle every single time if it's true every single time. But every car has a different color. It can have a different like manufacturer. So that's not going to be the same every single time. But what is going to be the same is that a car is a vehicle every single time. So that if you wanted to create a class that is a vehicle, then you would say car equals vehicle because that's the same for every single car. Whereas here, an instance attribute is specific to one instance. So that's the thing you can kind of change there. And I'll talk about a bit more about what this init method does. Because right now, define def. What we learned previously that you want to use def when you want to define a function, right? So I'm gonna just create a function because before we what we did was we to create a function we did something like this. We put define and then we just put the name of the function and then what we wanted to return back. That's what we did previously in previous classes. In this case, you have to do underscore underscore init underscore underscore. That's something you just have to do. It basically stands for initialize. And then you want to put, the brackets and then self. It's important you put the self. You have to put self. This cannot be another variable. This has to be self. And basically what this means is that self, it basically means that it's referencing itself. So if you want to reference a class, then you have to put the self here. But the other variables, you can change whatever you like. So I have name, I have breed. I could have changed it to A, B, B, C, anything really. But this self has to be the same. And then when you want to set those, and then basically what you have to do is you have to do self dot name. Then when to set the name equal to name. So basically, whenever you create an object, right, set up a specific instance of the class, what you want to do when you initialize that object is you want to set the name of the class to name here and set the breed equal to breed here. It's a bit confusing at first, but it sort of makes sense when you just consider that self basically references itself, and then you set name equal to name, breed equal to breed. So it kind of makes sense in that aspect. Just make sure you have this self here. And you want to do self.name, self.breed equals breed. Yeah, so more formally, what a, a method is a method is a function inside a class. So typically when you create a function inside a class, you don't call that thing a function, even though it technically is a function. You call that a method. And you call it a method because a method basically does something. It performs a specific task inside the class. Right? So we have this class called person here. So I'll just copy that down and kind of show you what it does. Feel free to copy this down on VS Code as well if you want. Define init self, and then we do name age, and then we also, oh, that's my bad. Um, Python, okay, that's fine. Oh, and we need to do init. Let's see, we also have um, self.name equals name and self.age equals age, right? This is what I talked about before. Self.name, you set that to name. Self.age, you set that to age. And you have to define the introduce method, right? So what we did before, introduce. Oh, you have to put self as well here. You have to reference itself, introduce self. So basically, it's just a function, except that you need to have self in here. You can also have other stuff, but if you want to keep it simple, just have self in here. And then you return something. Do f for f string, and then basically do f, and then whatever in here that you want to return, you return. So hi, my name is, my name is, and then you want to put these curly brackets, and then you want to do self.name. So that's what you defined here, self.name, this variable. My name is this, and I am, self.age is old. So basically, that's just a simple function or a simple method inside the class that you can use. And basically, what this does is it just creates a function that has use the f string here, and you put quotation marks on what exactly you want to return, or rather print out. So, hi, my name is curly brackets self.name, which is here, and then I am self.age. years old, which is what is here. So I'll just give you a moment to maybe copy this down and kind of just experiment with it. Yeah, I'll show you. Kind of just experiment with this. Yeah, so this is, we're gonna do some practice with this class. So just copy this down in VS Code. I'll give you like 2 minutes to copy it down. If you copied it down already, good. Just let me know in chat so we can get started when everyone has this copied down. So I'm assuming that everyone has copied this down. So we're gonna do some practice with this problem. And the first practice problem will be, uh, well, actually, not we're not gonna practice the problem yet. So first of all, we should. I'm gonna tell you exactly this, what exactly the method does, right? So because we created the method, right? But we haven't actually done anything with it yet. So if you've copied this down, great. Also, just try copying this down. Just set person one equals this. So I'll give you like 20 seconds to just copy this line down, so that you can also like run the code and see what exactly happens. And yeah, okay. I'm assuming you've copied that down, and we're just gonna create it here. Also, before we go into this, does anyone have like any questions about creating classes or anything that we covered so far? Okay, I'm assuming that is no question, so I will continue. So person one equals person, and then let's do Alice, 30. So what this does, I've just created an object, because to create an object, you call the name of the class. So you do person, right? That's why I called my class. And then I put Alice, because when you initialize it, see, this is why this thing is so needed, because you need to initialize the name and initialize the age. So you don't need to put self in here. You just need to put two things. Two things. Ignore the self. You want to put two things that match up to name and match up to age, right? Because I said self.name equals name. So I put Alice. Alice will be the name. And as for age, I will set the age equal to 30. So basically what you've done is you've just created an object. This object here is an instance of the class, meaning that it's when you call the class, you've called the class this specific time. This is this is basically something that encapsulates the class. This is something that like this basically is something that you've created using the class, if that makes sense. So now you have this thing has all these properties, as a property name equals Alice and age equals 30, but it also has this property, right? We also define this method and we can use that method because right now, if we print it right now, nothing happens, right? However, let's see print person one dot age. So you can access its attributes now. Your self dot age was equal to age. So if we do dot age, we can get its age. We can get the person's age. We can also get the person's name. And the name will be obviously Alice because that's what we set the name equal to. So that name will be Alice. So if we print that out, we're going to print 30 and then we're going to print Alice as well. So that's kind of the basics of accessing the properties of the class that we just created. And also, so we created this, and now let's how about we use the method that we created though. So basically, we can do print, and you want to access the object that we created, so person one, and now we can call this function introduce. And as you notice, we put the brackets here, but we don't put anything in here because we ignore the self, right? And what is there other than self in here? There's nothing else in self, so we just don't put anything here. So person one dot introduce. So that's a method. That's a method inside the class that now we can use, and this will return, hi, my name is. This will be Alice, and it says, and I am 30 years old. Hi, my name is Alice, and I am 30 years old. Right? So that's kind of how it works. And let's see. How about we do person two equals person. We can do John, and let's to 22. We do print person two dot introduce. Oh, I spelled this wrong. Okay, so what's going to happen here is person one dot introduce. So this is the object. It's going to say, hi, my name is Alice, and I'm 30 years old. Now we reference the class again. We created another object, and they'll say, hi, my name is John, and I'm 22 years old, because this is a new instance. This is unrelated to this. This is just, we use the class here, we use the class here. They do not have any sort of relationship. This thing will be its own thing. Like I'll say, hi, my name is Alice, and I'm 30 years old, and this will say, reference John. And as you can see, these are completely different things. And we can continue to do this as well. We can do person three, person four. We can create as many objects as we want using the class that we just created. So it's sort of like the class is very versatile. You can create many things using just one class. So I'll just keep it at Alice for now because that's kind of all we need. So yeah. So this is kind of what we've done so far. And this is kind of a bit talking about what I did before. After writing down the instance of the class you just created, put a dot, right? And then proceed to access its attributes or call a function or method. So that's what I did before. I did person one dot name because name is an attribute of the person, Alice, and it will be Alice. And then we just did introduce and it printed the function that we created as well. So yeah. Does anyone have any questions about this? Or just any questions in general about like naming or accessing attributes or just anything? Okay, I'm assuming there are no questions, so we can move on to this practice problem, which should create a new method in a class called happy, which should print I'm happy when called. So in the class I told you to kind of copy down, just create a new method in the class and um, should print I'm happy when called. Because just like in here, right? Just like how this method called introduce prints, hi, my name is this, and I'm this years old. Create a new method in here that's called happy, and it should print just I'm happy when it's called. So I'll give you guys around 5 minutes to do that, and I'll go over the answers at the end.
Can you go one slide up?
One slide, okay. Um, yeah,
Okay. I cannot understand practice problem.
you don't understand. Okay, so what we did here, right, was we create a method called introduce, and it printed out this. So the method was called introduce, it printed out this. I want you to create another method, and I want the method, instead of introduce, I want the method to be called happy. And when you reference that method, it should print I'm happy.
Okay, I understand.
Okay, cool.
Can you do up slide, please?
All right,
I'm
so
also
that's good to hear. I'll go over the answers now. So, the practice problem: create a new method in the class called happy, which should print I'm happy when completed. All right, so basically, what you should do is print define happy self. And to be honest, the method, I mentioned that usually it's common convention to set the name of the class, the first letter to be capital. But for methods, it can be lowercase. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to do uppercase and return I'm I'm happy. That's really all you need to do. And let's do print person one that happy. And yeah, notice that you usually use the f string if you want to like access a variable because you want to put the curly brackets and then access a variable such as name or age. But for this one, we don't really need any variables for this, so we can kind of just not use the f string. We can just return this singular thing. Quotation marks, which is a string, just says I'm happy. So if you got that, good job. If you put the f string here, it doesn't really matter, right? You can do this as well if you want, but if it's not needed, then personally I would not put it. Okay, so yeah, good job. And more practice, create a class attribute where the person's last name will always be Doe. So you shouldn't set it as Doe. It should just always be Doe. And I'll give you guys around 3 or 4 minutes to do that. Maybe a bit more or less, depending on if you guys are finished or not. All right, I'll go over the answers now. Create a class attribute where the person's last name will always be the. And so let's kind of go over what it does. Um, so we don't want to put it in here, right? We don't want to put it in here because this is a instance attribute. So that's associated with a specific instance. However, if you want something to be universal, you have to place it outside. So this is where you place class attributes. So you want to place it like nowhere else, not inside anything. Just place it at the top here. Let's do last name equals Doe. So now every instance will have this. So I'll show you what I mean. So um, we create person one, right? And we didn't set last name or anything. We already did it here. So if we do person one, or let's rather print person one dot last name, we should get Doe because last name that's associated with every instance of the class. So if we do person two equals person, we do John, and then we do 22, and from person's two dot last name, they're both gonna be Doe because we set it as a class attribute, which means every single object we create using the class is gonna have the last name Doe. So let's do it again. We get two Does because person one's last name will be Doe, person's two last name will be Doe, and person three, person four, all their last names will be Doe because we set it as this class attribute right here. So basically, that means it's going to be universal to all objects, basically. Um, yeah, and this is kind of encapsulation. So encapsulation, what this basically means is that basically, oh, sorry, let me just, okay, I think this is more clear. Encapsulation and it hides. This is what it means to hide the internal details of an object. So we create this class right here. It has all these properties, right? And basically, what it does is, it basically does some things behind the scenes, right? So it basically does things behind the scenes, so that some things can happen that you want it to perform a function, but you don't want it to actually like show you how it does it. It just kind of does it behind the scenes. So, for example, if we create a student whose name is John, and we do add grade 90, right? Um, self grades append grades. So basically, what that does is that it'll add grade. So we call the function add underscore grade, and let's put 90 in there, right? So basically, what happens is that we call this function right here, and self dot underscore underscore grades, which basically when you put two underscores, such as two underscores here, you create a list, right? And now you can use that list to do other stuff with it. It doesn't really matter like what it is. It's just a list. But in this case, we would want it to be a list because we can like easily calculate numbers, right? So remember how when we learned about lists, we also learned about some methods of lists, which includes sum. And if you do sum and then you call the list, you're going to get all the numbers added up in the list. So for example, if we add grade 90, so it's going to append grade, which is going to append 90 to the list, right? Then we add another 85. It's going to append the 85 to the list. So now we have two numbers in the list. We have 90 and then we have 85. And if we want to get the average, we want to calculate the average behind the scenes of the student, we can call this function, which is average.self, and it says if self dot underscore underscore grades, which basically means if this list has something. If it's not non-empty, which means it has at least one grade, we can return the average, right? Because if the student doesn't have any grades, we can't give the average of the student if they have no grades. It doesn't work like that. So only if there's some grades of the student, we can do return self dot underscore underscore grades divided by the length of the list, right? Because which it average is basically you add everything up and you divide it by the number of things that you added it up by. So we can do self dot underscore underscore grades, which basically refers to the list that we created here. and then divided by the length of that same list, and it should give us the average. And we do return zero because return zero basically means yes, everything worked fine. So basically, that's just return zero is kind of just like a placeholder. It's kind of just there to let the program know that everything went fine. There wasn't like an error. You calculated the student's average successfully. So, student. So we, as we did before, let's create an object. We name the student's name John, and then can you send me Google Slides on my email? Yeah, sure thing. Um, Student John, add grade, and then we calculate the average here. So we student dot average to call the function, or call the function which is average, and then you just put nothing in the brackets because remember you ignore the self, so you don't need to put anything in there. You do just this, and it should output 87.5 because that's the average of 90 and 85. So the class did that behind the scenes, basically meaning encapsulation. It just performed some calculations behind the scenes, and it just gave you that. So yeah, on the stream, yeah, I'll do that after class. And okay, so just quick parabolas problem. So we added 90 and 85. How about let's add another 100 to the student's average, and then print out the student's average again to see what the new average is. So I'll give you this thing to sort of copy down, and then you can add 90, 85, and then also want you to add the grid 100, and then recalculate the student's average and print that out. Okay, so I'll just give you this, and I'll set it here, and I'll just let you guys work for like 4 minutes. So basically, I'll go over the answers right now. Basically, what you want to do is, let me just see if I have, let me see if I've copied this down somewhere because I don't want to have to type everything in that.
Can you wait 1 minute? I left.
Okay, one more minute. Um, Yeah, I'll give you one more minute for add the grade 100 to the student's average and print out add 100, print out the student's average again.
Now you can change. I finish it.
All right. If you did complete a good job, basically what you have to do is you also just after this line you want to do student underscore add grid and then you put 100 in here. And then if you so basically you just have to add one line and then you can print out the student's average again. And it should say, I'm not exactly sure what it says, but it should say a new average that would be displayed. And yeah, so if you did that, good job.
Yeah, I got this answer.
All right, good job. All right. So now we have the one of the last methods is called the underscore underscore string underscore underscore method, which is known under the dunder or magic method. Basically, what this does is it defines how you want your object to be printed. Or yeah, basically that's because I'll show you. I think it's more clear with an example on why this is needed because it doesn't seem that important, but if you want to actually reference the object, it actually pretty important, and I'll show you exactly why that's the case. So fine, in it, let's do title page. So feel free to kind of copy this down after I um, do this as well. So self dot title equals title. All right, and then do define string, and then do f string, and then book self dot title, and do the len as well, known as the magic methods, even though it's not really magic, it's just yeah. All right, and then let's just create. Okay, so I'll just give you like 1 minute to copy this down on like your VS Code. So yeah, just 1 minute, and we are running a bit low on time, so try to maybe copy this down fast, and we can move on. Just let me know if you copied it down. So if everyone has copied it down, we can just move on fast. You're done. Okay. If everyone else is done, we can quickly move on. So basically, let's create a book. B equals book, and or I forgot to change the name to book, but book. Let's name it Python Basics. So basically, Python Basics, and then let's name it to 30 pages or 300 actually, and let's print string B. Now, what do you think it's going to give us? Well, it should give us. I mean, then B is the object, and the object is Python Basics, so we should get Python Basics, right? Yeah. But and do you know why that's the case? Well, it's due to this thing that we did here. It's not due to anything else. It's because we defined underscore underscore string in itself. This is kind of a custom method, so you're not gonna see us directly reference this name. It's just gonna it basically says if you want to access the name of this object, we should give you book, and then we should turn self title, which is the title. We set the title to Python Basics. So here I'll show you if I add just the number one in here, just random one, it'll say book one Python Basics. So that's basically what this thing does. And if you also put len b, we should get 300 because we turned self.page. And what if we remove this? This is why it's important, because if we remove this important function right here, and then we attempt to print string b, we attempt to get Python basics again, we get this book object at blah 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 blah. And basically what this bunch of gibberish tells us is that at this memory address in your computer, we have a book object. And this is completely useless information. It doesn't tell us the name of anything. It just gives us this random piece of gibberish that just tells us it's an object at this memory address. So if we want to actually make it useful, if we actually add this in here, it'll tell us the name of the book. It'll tell us the title of the book, which is actually useful because it gives us some piece of information to work with, rather than this random thing that doesn't really help us at all. If that makes sense. Because removing this, that it leads to this. If you add it back, it leads to this, which is useful.
I I do it, but I in my computer it's not work this code.
It's not working. Are you sure you um can you slide me? Okay, yeah. It's guys, we're gonna, if you are still stuck on this after the class, we're gonna send like this link to everyone. So check your email shortly after because we're sending some slides to everyone. But for now, this actually concludes the end of the Python Code Unity course. Thank you for attending all these classes. Feel free to also email us feedback if you want.
But after class, you can send me Gmail. I actually send in comment box.
Okay, yeah. So if you guys have
Hi.
any